Started. Hey everybody, my name is Stacy Estep. I'm the Literary Arts Director for SAFTA, and on behalf of all of us, I would like to welcome you to the August installment of the Sundress Reading Series. Yay! Before we dive into the readings, we need to give a huge thank you to the Tennessee Arts Commission for a wonderful grant that enables us to pay our readers. Yes, that is awesome. And I also want to tell you about this month's community partner. The Change Center is a local Knoxville recreation center that formed during the Save Our Sons initiative and is focused on reducing violence-related deaths and increasing opportunities for success among teens and young adults. The Change Center offers a safe place for teens and young adults to play and relax through indoor skating, an arcade, and a rock climbing area. They also provide ways to forge strong relationships by opening doors of opportunity that lead to positive outcomes through entrepreneurship mentoring, job skills and networking opportunities, and promoting part-time employment. And in addition to all that, during the pandemic, the Change Center has been a staple for providing weekly grab-and-go meals for the community. So we invite you all to make a donation to the Change Center at their GoFundMe page, and we'll have that link in the chat to make it easy for you to click and donate. And we also encourage you to visit their website, changecenternknoxville.com, to learn more about their mission, and that link will also be in the chat. And of course, you can follow them on social media as well. And please also check the chat for information about where you can find tonight's readers online and maybe get your hands on their books. And now, without further ado, let's meet our readers. First up, we have Lauren Russell. Lauren is the author of Descent from Tarpaulin Sky Press and What's Hanging on the Hush from Asata Press. A 2017 NEA Creative Writing Fellow, in poetry. She has also received fellowships from Cave Canem and the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing and residencies from the Rose O'Neill Literary House at Washington College, the Millet Colony for the Arts, and City of Asylum, Passaporta. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, the Brooklyn Rail, Cream City Review, and the anthologies Bettering American Poetry 2015 and Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry, among others. She was assistant director of the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics at the University of Pittsburgh for the last 4 years. And beginning this fall, she joins the faculty at Michigan State University as an assistant professor in the Residential College in the Arts and Humanities and director of the Center for Poetry there. Please welcome Lauren.
Mute myself. Thank you, Stacy, and I also want to thank Erin for all her hard work on this event, and I'm really excited to hear Shawnte and JM. So thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to read a little bit from Descent, which just came out this summer. The premise is, in 2013, I acquired a copy of the diary of my great-great-grandfather, Robert Wallace Hubbard, or Bob, and he was a captain in Hood's Texas Brigade in the Confederate Army in the Civil War. And after the end of the war, went back to East Texas and had children by 3 of his former slaves who were also sisters. And one of them, Peggy, was my great-great-grandmother. So I'm going to read a little bit from Descent. Oh, the part I forgot to say is I became really fascinated by everything he was leaving out of the diary, and that was sort of the beginning of this project. Dear Robert, dear Redbeard, dear specter of the great white father, dear slaveholder, dear Confederate captain captured at Gettysburg, dear dispenser of land, favor, seaman, procreator of 20 children by 3 sisters simultaneously, dear father of the Negro League pitcher, dear farmer, schoolmaster, landlord, hired hand, grave paler, log roller, surveyor, and manure shoveler, dear singer, dear churchman and circus fan, dear reveler at brigade reunions, dear collector of sentimental poems about loneliness and redemption, dear pointy-eared like Lucifer and bearded beyond Rasputin, Dear mythical Jim Crow defier, hero of my grandfather's childhood, who took him on the whites-only section of the streetcar, he claimed this really happened, proclaiming, these are my grandchildren and they're sitting with me. Dear diarist, dear widower, dear lonesome hunger, dear admirer of well-formed women, dear inscrutable in the tintype beside your favorite half-claimed child, dear tallier of payments, debts, work days, weather conditions, neighbors by name and race, dear borer of wells, dear master of omission. Heard a whippoorwill holler this morning for the first time this spring. Heard a whippoorwill holler, all hands choking cotton. Heard a holler, a whimper. Heard a will whip her. Will heard a whip. Whip or will heard, herding hers, whipping herds, sowing oats, whipping whores, stripping cane or. Whelped her, willed her, a well and a hold, dank of the dark of the hell of the hold. Choking cotton, cot in, a yoke and a pull, stripped and caned for. Heard her holler, caught her, held her hand to the, whipped out your, held her head to the, whipped out the billfold. Heard a whimper this spring, choked or, heard a holler, a hollowed out hold, whipped to a wheelbarrow, hell bent toward a hole, ripped from a, wrapped in a gut wrench sugar hold. Question. So how did the women feel about this? Answer. Don't guess they had no say. This one begins with an epigraph. I have many a time been actually and painfully thirsty, and yet in sight of an ocean of fresh water. Decimus et ultimus Barziza escaped POW. Johnson's Island, winter 1863 through 64. That winter the pipes froze and no longer brought water in from the bay. The guards ordered the men to dig 2 holes about 8 feet deep. They installed pumps, but still the water is always exhausted within an hour of reveille. He has forgotten to change his socks, as toes are freezing in their own sweat. The wind claws at his eyelids and lips. The ice is driving at him in spikes, fearsome. And for a second, he thinks the wind is hammering nails into his face, that God Almighty is bent on paling his grave. But no, he is grateful for the warmth of the beard, ought to wrap it around him like a scarf. It is almost long enough. His thirst gravel in his throat, his ears tingling and then suddenly numb. Heard a whippoorwill holler, heard a holler, a whimper, a whirlpool, a snicker, heard a stag kick her. Long hours between roll call and roll call, he tries to rewrite his own history, to erase the moment his ears popped, charging a Pennsylvania hill. Whip 'em, boys, whipped or not whipped yet, how you begin to doubt your own head. A shell exploding ahead, and even the screams of the man beside you are muted like cries from the shore when you are holding your breath underwater. The line's a scattered mess of boulders, but you're yelling, stand firm, why? The rebel yell issuing from your own spent breath, though you cannot hear, but for a moment think you will make it to the top despite gunfire hailing down the forest, a dizzying maze of smoke, and half-blinded retching, you run headlong into a tree before you are taken. How? Sword in the back, see yourself relinquishing your revolver to a first lieutenant from New York, some retribution for Second Manassas, the blue columns at Fredericksburg melting away. Look away, look away. The boy who disarmed him was younger than he, had curious auburn eyes that reminded Bob of some dogs he'd seen. Again, my great-great-grandmother's name was Peggy. Peggy rises out of sleep through the dream called blue, where all her kinfolks are wading through fields of blue. Even her father left in Georgia, her stillborn brother somehow grown, her niece who stumbled into the fire on Christmas Day and died with the vision of her white dress aflame, the aunt or uncle who ran off or was lost forever to the auction block. They are all wearing blue, blue hats, blue shawls, and in the way they sing a song with no words deep from the gut, there is also blue. And bluely she creeps toward them in her calico blue. And now there is a dance. They are partnering for the quadrille, and the man they called Bo Peep cradles a banjo, strikes a tune blue. And her petticoats starched with hominy water and Pris's too. And every time they stop moving for a second, the petticoats pop and Pris giggles, and in Pris's eyes are flecks of blue. The log train shakes her into waking, black then dark blue, and she reaches for her kerchief blue, and she is stumbling toward the cradle blue and cooing shoo shoo to the baby who is hollering now. One Sunday, the preacher prayed, "Lord, let us all go to heaven where there'll be no log train." Hoo, 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 and a clankety clank, whose black smoke curling into the half blue. I don't usually read the essays in the book because they're a little bit longer, but this one reminded me of, it made me think about what's going on in Wisconsin now. So for content warning, there's more recent violence in this one. Show a witness. I am rereading Dawn Lundy Martin's book, Life in a Box is a Pretty Life, which asks the question, when there is no choice, when the box is inescapable, then what? My alarm goes off at midnight. I don't remember setting it. I carry the book to the bedroom. I am going to look up the word phantasmagoric. My phone has finished charging, and before accessing my Merriam-Webster app, I check Facebook and find that an unarmed 19-year-old Black man has been killed by a Madison police officer near Williamson and Few. There is or has been a gathering at the site. That would be a half-hour walk for me at midnight in the cold. I am not going. But I remember how the cop car slowed as I was rounding my corner this afternoon, how I noticed the grill on the backseat window stared at the bars. Of course, there are many cops in Madison, and I live across the street from their parking garage. What about when there is no choice, when the box is inescapable, then what? In Madison, where there are hardly any Black people, and Dane County, where Black adults between 18 and 54 make up 4.9% of the population that age, but 52.4% of the incarcerated population, I live half a block from the county jail, which is euphemistically named the Public Safety Building. There I see more Black people coming and going than I ever see on my walk to work, on my walk to the grocery store, to the bank, to the pet store, to the coffee shop, or certainly in my classroom at the University of Wisconsin, where I have had only one Black student this year. And so when I walk home, I wonder if passersby think I am getting out of jail, or visiting someone, or posting bail. On a comment thread in response to an article about a Black Lives Matter rally last fall, someone said something like, Black people are 5% of the population of Dane County, and 50% of that 5% are criminals. It turns out that Tony Robinson, the unarmed Black man killed by a Madison police officer, had a white mother. I also have a white mother. In Madison, I have become Black. In LA and New York, I never identified as Black. Even in Pittsburgh, where there is no middle ground, I would say, my dad is Black. I was partly distancing myself from an undesirable degree of Blackness, the internalized racism I could recognize but not quite expunge, and I was partly resisting the urge to make a claim I could not deliver on. For me, the right to Blackness always felt unearned. Aren't I a white girl on the phone? In Madison, I have become Black. Is this inextricably linked to my hatred of Madison? Phantasmagoria 1, an exhibition of optical effects and illusions. 2a, a constantly shifting complex succession of things seen or imagined. Being a scene that constantly changes. 3, a bizarre or fantastic combination, collection, or assemblage. From the diary of Robert Wallace Hubbard, February 1st, 1890, a Saturday. This evening, just at night, went over to the Blair Creek schoolhouse to a sleight of hand show and witnessed a little girl walk a tight wire and some very good sleight of hand tricks. And then I did an erasure of that entry. Just a nig, over the creek show, a witness. The magician hand has slipped, or is he a trick? What about when there is no choice? When the box is inescapable, then what? When the Genographic Project says I am more Scandinavian than African, I don't know how to feel about it. If I went to Denmark in this skin, this smoking cyclone crown of frizz, and declared the findings, who would they convince? I'm told I am more Scandinavian than African and wonder where this belongs in the half-built book I am no longer living in. Bob Hubbard was always gathering moss for the mudcat chimneys he raised over Polk County. A county surveyor knew where lines bent. Did he leave behind a genetic map? Bob came through and made everyone kin, one of my cousins laughs. From Emma Haynes' History of Polk County, 1937. When the camp was established at Moscow, every house was closed and Negroes paraded up and down the streets. The next morning, 4 Negroes were found hanging to a tree. The Ku Klux Klan would control the Negroes and did to a great extent, but the citizens were kept in constant fear of a Negro uprising. Oh, that people loved peace rather than war. In the book I built, where I no longer live, some nights hummings in the walls, not wind hissing through chinks, but a human song that shifts in sleep and dips into a low diphthong. Peggy. That moon ain't hiding, clouds a shawl, moon's cold as brass tacked upside a night's frock. Pin your tears, to her they'll sing like chimes, or ghosts that cry. Sometimes I feel I'm almost gone. Ghosts charred in dead men's lust. Think I'm some fool, got brains of shucks? Since freedom I've been through the toughs. See, one moon casts your shadow twice, once toward the bottomland, once toward the pines. The wind's right smart, but moon, she's sly. Look, lightning bugs, they spark, but they cannot catch fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll be hearing from Shawnte Orion. Shawnte attended Paradise Valley Community College for one day, but he's the author of Gravity and Spectacle, a collaboration with photographer Gia Oak Baker from Tulsa Books, the Existentialist Cookbook from NYQ Books, and Faithful as the Ground from Five Oaks Press. He is a former Copper State Haiku Slam champion, and his poems have appeared in Three Penny Review, Barrel House, Georgetown Review, New York Quarterly, and elsewhere. He is an editor for Rinky Dink Press and has performed in bookstores, bars, universities, hair salons, museums, and laundromats. You can find out more at his website, and I hope we have the link for that in the chat. Please welcome Shawnte.
Thank you so much. I will try not to spend too much time talking, but it's an honor to read with Lauren and JM, so much thanks to Sundress for putting all this together. I usually try to start off with just a short poem to kind of break the ice. So this is from an older chapbook. The inspiration was just my own petty vengeance. And then I spent the rest of the day having to research CDC guidelines for what disqualifies a person for being able to donate blood. Maybe it'll make sense. In solidarity with frogs whose defense mechanism is a bad aftertaste once they have already been devoured. This year's mosquito finds the skin beneath cotton, bites through corduroy. This year's mosquito has evolved to penetrate denim. But this year's mosquito doesn't know that I got a new tattoo within the past 12 months, that I've been having unprotected sex, that I vacationed in the Falkland Islands in 1993, and my veins are conduits for hypertension. This year's mosquito doesn't know that he is now blood brothers with every bedbug with whom I've ever shared a motel. Now, welcome to the desert. The only thing I'll point out about this one is that the area code for Phoenix is 602. This one is called 66602. The Sonoran Desert is an hourglass, knocked on its side. From each of the four directions, saguaros flip you off. Remember not to feed or pet squirrels without fur called scorpions. Photo radar cameras line the 101 corridor, making the Pima Freeway the world's most expensive photo booth. The monsoon sun is a billboard advertising back sweat, and the official state bird of Arizona is the ceiling fan. Half the citizens of Phoenix are transplants from Michigan, while the other half are trying to move to Portland. The afternoon breeze cauterized your ear as clerks on a smoke break proved that the sidewalk is indeed hot enough to fry a cigarette. So this book, it is a collaboration with photographer Gia Oak Baker, and we couldn't believe that Tolson did such a great job of putting this all together. So, although the book launches and everything had to be canceled, hopefully I can visit some places and show this off in person sometime. So shout out to Tolson for making this happen too. Forever like the stamp on your wrist. 18 months of hand-drawn flyers and suddenly everyone knows the words. But it's August in Phoenix, so nobody sings along because air conditioning never opens for my friend's band. They play 3.5 songs before the cops show up, $10 in advance, gentrification at the door. Most of my poems are pretty short. I think I'm always trying to break the ice, constantly surrounded by so much ice. Click, buzz, bait. You've been reading this sonnet wrong your whole life. Like 14 things that prove dogs are nobody's friend. Like 12 horoscopes Germans can't explain to millennials. But what this next single mom wronged will blow your time. Will shock you like 17 flight attendants who are not having their best day. During breastfeeding layovers in the only time zone for introverts, take this Netflix quiz to find out which character you would be from the film of the Hubble Space Telescope's ultraviolet flyby of the Helix Nebula. You've been feeding this buzz your wrong life, baiting that click feed with 7 things to never tell your phlebotomist. Like a guide to which 50 states in America women who care about their rights should avoid, ranked in no particular order. some of the poems and photos in here take place, within the local music scene. So there are some little micro poems for a lot of my favorite Phoenix Underground bands sprinkled throughout. I'll just read an excerpt of a few of them here. Southwest by Southwest Shiz Fest. AJJ at the trunk space. 100 and fuck degrees. All ages art punk sleeper cell, crammed into the Grand Wedge room. Dance to student loans, dance to the rent, dance to going to work at 6:30 in the morning. Let's hate everything together. Skinwalkers at the fix. Mushrooms from the Willow House, light socket kisses, serving pay what you can fry bread, cooked on an ironing board. Remember that the city was beautiful before they tried to make it beautiful. Vanessa Atalanta at Drip Coffee Lounge. Cardigan years old and one, gust of wind away from becoming the kite's marionette. Undressed the way rain smells without creosote. Dinosaur love at third space. The fossils were as real as Pangea, as real as the Mesozoic era, as real as the feathers, as real as the asteroid, but God was invented by the brontosaurus to test scientists' faith. I guess a lot of my poems are short. Maybe I'm always trying to break the ice. This one's for anyone who's been told, yeah, I only like their first record. Fresh sanctimony for rotting purists. Faded dead Kennedys. Tribal tattoo prefers your earlier biceps. If we were in person, I'd probably laugh right there, but luckily you're just here with me on Zoom. This book was supposed to come out a few years ago, and we kept delaying it because it just wasn't good enough. And one of the main delays for me too was Chris Cornell's death. I wasn't a very productive writer or human for a little while. This is called Listening to the Soundgarden song where Chris Cornell sings, "Remember everything's just black or burning sun." We were the last generation to need a voice. Once desperate ways to be heard were cradled in every palm. No one listens like us anymore. Pining for moments entwined with songs only you could sing, cough syrup psychedelia, duct tape down to your boots, a fistful of pennies thrown at the wind. Burning the last candle in a haunted stairwell, smile full of Novocaine, the responsibility of the moment soaked with gasoline. A kiss to lock the cage, this empty prayer heavy in your arms. Heathens plucked a feather that shattered the moon. Now the angels won't stop barking. So all of the photos are kind of based around this weird paper mache cactus head mask thing with a bunch of eyeballs that was created by artist J.J. Horner. And he was the co-founder for a cool skate company called Pyramid Country. So we tried to pay some homage to some of those roots in here. As someone who pays attention to language, I love the poetics of just even the names of tricks. And I thought it'd be really fun to name a bunch of tricks that don't exist. So in this poem, there are some of each. This is called Pavement Any Flavor. Laminated maple, stale fish grab, concrete sushi, saran wrap, polyurethane roll, sick rotational inertia, grip tape gutter mouth, vegan nicotine, outside of outsiders, sidewalks are neither. Ginger snap, fuck side bail, dark slide Casper flip, Pennywise thoughts in 8-bit Technicolor yawn, lip side rail, staircase to hospital gown already been done. But after swallowing asphalt, never been landed tricks, stuck in the ripplescape of distant mind terrain, footloose bacon grab, Barbie doll toe melt, Chewbacca comb over, Russia collusion scrape, East Side Jefferson high-rise move up, film this Andrew Jackson abbreviation, kick back Exeter large tetrahedron collider, the future you know is over, gravity called the police. In case anyone's missing the RNC for this, this is called Make Orwellian Dystopia Science Fiction Again. Your swamp is a disaster, pathetic, stagnant water and flaccid leeches, sad. I will declare it a national park so I can shut it down, drain it so it can be refilled with the greatest alligators you've ever seen, tremendous alligators. My swamp will be luxurious, the biggest and greatest swamp. Huddled masses of parents will try to send their kids to my swamp using their swamp vouchers. So we'll have to build a huge wall that won't cost a dime, believe me. A great, great wall paid for by cancer patients who had the nerve to pre-exist. Speaking of clowns, I'm just gonna end with a few micro poems. Before I became an editor for Rinky Dink Press, they published my little collection in series 1, and it was inspired by the small town in California called Wasco, where it made headlines because every night people dressed as clowns were kind of like menacing the neighborhood, and I wrote all these poems. I'll just read a few of them. The street lamp clowns the street lamp clowns of Wasco juggle 3-ring insomnia and endless handkerchiefs, colorful scarves, chloroform scented, believe laughter is the best tourniquet. The street lamp clowns are eager babysitters, pockets full of balloon animal carcasses. They know exactly which window peers into your bedroom, how much space remains between your mattress and floor, how much silence can squeeze into the back of your closet. Thesis defense at the Barnum and Bailey Clown College MFA. The street lamp clowns want you to know that the earth remembers bones longer than hearts and skin, but smiles are first to decompose. So, yeah, if I have a few of these left over, maybe I'll tuck some of them into any books that anybody ever gets from me. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shawnte. That was so fun. All right. And our final reader this evening is J.M. Wong, a queer child of the Chinese diaspora on Turtle Island via Malaysia and Singapore. J.M. says the point is not to interpret and philosophize the world, but to act to change it. Please welcome J.M. Wong.
Apologies, I am working on some technical things.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience navigating this with me. So I'm reading from a piece called 3 Deaths in a Chinese American Diaspora Story, and just thinking about 3 working class deaths around the world, actually, that has really impacted me and helped me understand my place here on Turtle Island. And this was written pre-COVID and also pre-George Floyd rebellion, and references China, which I think is important for right now, given all the anti-China sentiment as well. So I'm reading excerpts from this piece. Thank you. So the first name I'm calling into space is Xu Li. I arrived at his desk as a translator of his poems about working and living in the factory of the world, Shenzhen, China. At 24 years old, 4 years after leaving his home in coastal Guangdong province, he had leaped to the end of his life. He had likened himself to objects he handled every day in his working life, a screw. One that, like many others, lands carelessly on the ground after being jostled and handled. He grieved a youth lost in stifling factory walls that swallowed not just his emotions, but his ability to feel. A numbness that left him a heap of exhausted dead flesh at the end of the day, with little to put towards what he loved, books and poetry. I witnessed his dying through his poems post-mortem. He had wielded my mother tongue into a melancholic curse on the horrors of factory life. The language with which my earliest longings for love, safety, and home found shape in, he twisted into a passionate, if not angry, uproar at the state of affairs. Confined in a few words, yet explosive in its indictment. How does one translate 皮肤被自去强迫褪去? What is a 自去? It's a jig. A jig is an object that holds a piece of work and guides the tools operating on it. A stabilizing tool for one to work around, except when speed and exhaustion cause your fingers to be caught endlessly, picking skin from flesh, an aggregation of assaults that bruise forcefully. So we translate that into the jig forces the skin to peel. My city sensibility grasped to comprehend his industrial references. Our connection rested simply on the utility of the product of his labor, my phone. The labor he so detested and the phone I was so disgustingly addicted to. His family was from Jieyang, Guangdong. Mine was from the neighboring province, Nan'an, Fujian. He was a 打工者, and his life was shaped foremost by the availability of work over any other concern. A repressive state apparatus that prioritized labor peace meant crackdowns on any semblance of organizing, creating a void in institutional legacy and memory of vibrant worker resistance. I was a nurse in a hospital hustling to cram my hours so I could take time off to organize and be with my communities within the relative freedoms granted us in the belly of the beast. Yet somewhere between our disparate lives was the story of Asia, of revolution and counter-revolution, of the various rise and falls of anti-colonial movements in the region, of U.S. Cold War policy in the Pacific Rim, U.S. presence in Southeast Asia and the anti-communist proxy war, of history of diaspora, of displacements and land reforms and propagandas. The story of the world in the last 100 years that set the backdrop for my encounter with a dead poet's work. I had searched vehemently for the stories that could help me explain my presence in this foreign land that my ancestors were not from. These same stories that set the backdrop for us, two Chinese people from neighboring provinces, encountering each other through death, poetry, and sentiments lost in translation. She became the common dead ancestor I shared with other factory workers I got to know. His desperation was not an isolated sentiment, and it was resonant. In fact, 17 other workers had jumped that same year. So I'll go to the next excerpt. And this is Amar Rangansana. I'm calling Amar Rangansana into this space. Amar presenting. I wish all toxic gases had a hue to them. This detention center complex would be shrouded in that repulsive, fearsome, impenetrable, thick green gas that would visually declare it the deadly place that it is. An EPA Superfund site, declared unsafe for residents in proximity to power plants, ports, and methanol plants. Its emissions are known to cause cancer. It is the site of an immigration detention facility, a euphemism for a prison, a black hole housing non-U.S. citizens awaiting precarious fates from a dysfunctional, racist, and violent administration. If we had color sensors for emotions and red is for rage and blue is for sorrow, then this building would be engulfed in a pulsating, throbbing purple, leaking under the heavy doors, between the cracks in the walls, under the glass panes in the visiting room, over the noisy television blaring in the waiting area, into the sockets that power the privatized video visitation terminals, through the phone receivers that transmit messages to the outside world. It would choke up the lungs, force you to gasp for that single breath of oxygen that is long gone, and heave in airless, suffocating exasperation, cause of death, oppression-induced hypoxia. For now, the body is a weapon of dissent. The fierce resistance of captive people within the concrete cages takes the form of hunger strikes. Amar was one such courageous dissident. I arrived at Amar Mangensana's death 2 days after his body was found in the coma of the solitary cell of the detention center. Standing before the concertina wire surrounding the detention center, we had gathered to acknowledge and witness the atrocity that this 40-year-old asylum seeker from Buryatia, Russia, had experienced. He had entered his 47th day of hunger strike with the intention to starve his way into freedom, protesting the conditions in his confinement. On the 47th day, they allegedly found that he had strangled himself with his bed sheets. Many questions revolve around this man's eventual death and the events leading up to it. Why had he been placed in solitary confinement? Why the confusion around familial consent in pulling the plug when he was hospitalized? And really, why the cruel and inhumane conditions? Why this entire fuckery? It is at the crossroads of departure that I encountered Amar's death again. His remains were now a box of ashes at the funeral home, 9 pounds to be exact. Accompanying a dear friend who had taken on the task of overseeing his journey back home, I saw his remains in an urn, tucked securely in a box filled with bubble wrap. At the post office that one day, a week before Christmas, the clerk told us that the holiday rush could possibly delay his return home. Would he arrive before the 49th day of mourning in Buddhist shaman religion? His family wanted him back before to practice the rites and send him in peace. There are many arcs of time, one of death and release, another of goods shipping back and forth across ocean waters to make it in time for a frantic holiday season. Somewhere in the ocean, Amar's ashes will land next to batches of Kish children's toys, maybe in a blue container marked Maersk, Hanjin, or something. He could have been a gift delivery whose voyage one could track, except he wasn't. And now fast forward to some endings don't forecast new beginnings. Some endings are just that, a book slammed shut with no impending ease. Sometimes we enter endings with a sense of delusion, as if the sorrow and heartbreak that accompanies endings could trigger reality to be more palatable and more easeful, as if illusions could materialize with the intensity of our emotions. But there's nothing easy about a man who spent his life escaping the violence of his homeland, only to find himself back there as a stack of ash, neatly packaged, delivered priority, lying next to tons of Kish Christmas gimmicks. And the last name I'll call into the space is Akai Gurley. Akai Gurley, Black Lives Matter. Akai Gurley was a Black man. He had just recently survived Rikers prison. Released a few months before, he was ready to be present for his family, especially his 2-year-old toddler, whom he affectionately called his little twin. That one night in 2014, he walked out of his parents' house in Brooklyn, New York, after getting his hair done, getting ready for his long Chinatown bus ride the next day. He wanted to show off his new toddler to his beloved family in Jackson, Florida. New photos and exciting new memories laid ahead. He did not survive the stray bullet that struck him that night. It was indeed a cop who shot that bullet. It wasn't aimed at him, but what matters is that the bullet struck Akai Gurley and it killed him. The cop who fired the bullet was a man named Peter Liang, along with his partner Sean Landau. Peter Liang was patrolling the Pink Houses, a housing project in Brooklyn. It was dark. The lights had been broken in the housing stairwell for many years. Peter Liang, a rookie cop, was a bundle of nerves, and he walked with his pistol drawn, already in his fight-or-flight mode. Startled by the sound of the door opening in the stairwell below, he fired. The first thing that came to the cop's mind was not whether the bullet had struck anyone. It was whether they should call it in to their supervisor and risk getting fired. The bullet ricocheted on the walls and struck Akai Gurley a floor below. The first things that came to the cops' mind when they saw that it had struck a man was not to fall on their knees and conduct CPR. The man laid out before them was bleeding profusely and choking. What they did instead was to stare at the Black woman who fumbled over the bleeding body, taking CPR instructions from the 911 dispatcher. They stood, they stared, presumably in shock. Minutes later, Akai Gurley was pronounced dead. To pin Akai Gurley's death solely on the shoulders of the cop whose bullet killed him is incomplete. It is true that the vertical patrolling policy of the NYPD has always been racist and targets the poorest residents in the city. Institutional racism and anti-poor policies set the context for the cops being in the building that night and the events that followed. To remove any responsibility on the cop who fired the bullet that ended up killing Akai Gurley is also incomplete. There were many things Peter Liang could have done, which he did not do. The last of it was to fire the gun and stare immobilized and in shock. The first of it was to aspire to be a police officer for the largest police force in the country with a known reputation for being racist. To associate serving the NYPD with keeping the public safe, or to associate being a police officer with successful assimilation as an immigrant is to be misled or willfully ignorant. The letter of the law charged Peter Liang with manslaughter, but law and justice are not the same thing. And in another world, a jury of peers may have charged Liang with aiding and abetting the perpetration of a racist institution on the streets of New York, and its true perpetrator will also be besieged and demolished. May the deaths we mourn matter. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, JM. That was really powerful. Okay, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, so we can open things up for questions. If anybody has any questions or comments for our readers, please go ahead and type those into the chat so our readers can see them. Anybody? I have a question for Lauren. How did you come to get those diaries from your ancestor, and what made you decide to take the approach that you did?
My brother was on some sort of online genealogy forum way back in the day and found some mention of it, that this diary existed, and it gave me the project of tracking it down. And I think the first time I tried to get a copy was like 2009 or so. And I did not succeed that time. And then I gave up the trail, and my brother for years just kept bugging me about it. I think just to have something to bug me about. And finally, in 2013, I actually got the copy. It was in a Polk County Memorial Museum in Polk County, Texas. It's a little small historical organization for the county. And nobody knows where the original is, but they have a copy of the diaries there. And the approach that I did, I think, as I said, I became really fascinated by what was being left out. It took me a year to type it. It was 225 pages of Bob Hubbard's diaries. And I was just like, this is so weird, because he would talk about his kids, but he wouldn't say they were his kids. And he mentioned my great-great-grandmother a few times, and one point explicitly pointed out she'd been his cook. It was just like, it was just like very strange. And he'd also talk about some of the Civil War battles he'd been in, but never mentioned being captured. And it was like, who is this curated for? And I just became intrigued by all the omissions and decided to start writing into that space and started researching as well. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Very cool. Okay, Aaron asks, has writing changed for you at all during the past 6 months? I guess that's for everybody.
Personally, I haven't been writing much these last 6 months. First it was just, so hard to focus and concentrate when you're trying to figure out, how fast this world is changing around you. And then things got so backed up at my work that I've just been working like insane amount of hours. And so it's just been really hard to find a lot of time. I don't mind because I know like all that stuff just builds up in you anyway. And then when you do get a chance to write, you'll figure stuff out. But that's my state of affairs.
Anybody else weighing in on that?
I haven't been writing a lot either. I found that very distracting and sort of hard to concentrate and hard to focus and trying to sort of figure out how to live and be in the world or not be in the world, be in my apartment. And then in the middle of the summer, I relocated, which was also kind of logistically complicated, and started a new job. So it hasn't been the easiest time for me to concentrate on writing, but I agree, like this stuff builds up, and we'll all see what happens in a few years or yeah.
Do you think that's changed what writing means to you at all?
I don't think it's changed much what writing means to me, but it's kind of emphasized some of the constant struggles and dilemmas and arguments within your own head about it. When you see all the stuff that's happening around in the world, and like I remember Matt Hart saying, all I know is that if you've got time to write poems, you've got more time than you deserve. And so sometimes you wonder what's important about writing whatever you're writing, and it always seems so meaningless compared to what's going on around you. But then you have to remember that somebody's got to capture all these moments.
I don't know if it's changed what writing means to me, because I feel like I've always sort of had periods when I wasn't, or when I was sort of absorbing what was going on. I think I miss it. I experience it as a like sort of a life force when I'm really in it and really able to just sort of be in the writing, and not being able to like concentrate on that for some sort of expansive time. It does feel like something sort of essential for like my emotional well-being or something has been missing, and maybe making it more difficult. So I'm looking forward to finding ways to cultivate some expansive time in the future, whether it's for writing or creating in some other way.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't respond because I was worried about this phone situation. But I haven't been writing very much either the last 6 months, and just been overwhelmed with trying to figure out what life is. But there's so much in my head that needs to come out. And I think, yeah, that's really inspired by what's happening on the streets and the resilience of the communities, Black communities and other POC communities. So I'm hoping to find space to do that.
All right, well, that about does it. We're out of time, unfortunately, but before we go, I want to again thank you all for being here. I want to thank the Tennessee Arts Commission again, and thank everybody for coming tonight and for supporting the arts community here in Zoom land, which is how we have to do everything these days. Of course, thank you especially to our fantastic readers. Round of applause again. Please do make sure you check the chat for the links to where you can find them online and where you can donate to our community partner, the Change Center. We have some other upcoming events that I want to tell you about. On Wednesday, September 9th, 2 weeks from tonight, we hope you'll join us back on Zoom for a writing workshop focusing on topics related to disability, hosted by yours truly. I'm really stoked about that, and I hope you will be too. And then on Wednesday, September 30th, we'll be back here for the next installment of our reading series. And our readers will be Cyan J, Charlotte Pence, and Allison Stein. So mark your calendars for those events and check out our Facebook page for more info about all of that. And until then, good night, everybody. Thank you.